These guys are in for a big second season.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He's site editor with Athlon Sports' Inside the Huskies. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thanks for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Lars, we got a really fun show coming out all day, every day today. We're going to get into a little bit of NFL draft talk. How many of these former Huskies, Carson, Bruner, Keleki Latu, Voight-Sanufi, Alphonzo, Tuputala, how many of these guys might end up getting drafted in April? It's going to be a lot of fun. We love covering the draft on this show. We're going to talk about recruiting because there are a couple of pretty shocking numbers about this staff's first season down in California, which has always been very important to Washington's success on the recruiting trail. But Lars, we're going to have a lot of fun. First thing, the stipulation is this is outside of DeMond Williams. So we're talking for all our videos here on YouTube. We're talking about second-year players who could make the leap in 2025. That's sophomores, that's redshirt freshmen. And there are a lot of guys that you and I came up with in the pre-show where it's, hey, we want to talk about this guy, we want to talk about that guy. But there are none more important that you and I both agreed should be number one than Adam Mohammad.
Yeah, and this is one where if not for Jonah Coleman, Adam Mohammad, the obvious RB1, and I think we're pretty confident. Now, again, it's more like Myles Gaskin year two, where you're probably thinking, 1,000-yard season potential, handful of touchdowns, but then junior year, he'd really break out. This is a guy where it still blows my mind that he's only 19. Like, I think he's only 19. I could be wrong about that.
But he hasn't even turned 19 yet.
Oh, yeah, but he's turning 19 before the start of the next season, I believe. And it's crazy to me is you just look at him and physically, he proved this year that he could handle the load. I know it wasn't necessary. It was our bold prediction show that was less so bold prediction when I said that Adam Mohammad would play in every game this year, barring injury. And again, actually, to his credit, took a bunch of physical hits, did not get hurt this year. And if he did, I'm sure he got dinged up because everybody gets dinged up. But the fact that he didn't miss a game due to injury, that speaks volumes to me because we talked so much about being able to play as freshman, being able to handle the physicality, especially in the Big Ten. It wasn't like he was a gadget back where you're avoiding contact at all costs. He's a guy that can deliver the contact more so than take it. And so you look at that, especially with Joe, like I would not be surprised if Adam ends up getting more. I don't know what the over-under should be set at. I know the Arizona numbers, I think, would probably put it at
I got this. I can give you one if you keep talking for 1 minute as I look this up.
Okay, because I was going to say, because I would put the over-under at like 88.5 for carries for Adam Mohammad this year. And again, we'll see how right I am in terms of the numbers when you pull them up. But I just look at that and the numbers that he put up this year, I think because it was a foundational year, and especially with the struggles of the offensive line, with an improved offensive line, both Adam and Jonah get better numbers. And Jonah already had over 1,000 yards this season. So Adam easily could have 400 or 500 yards, 600 yards next season, 4 or 5 touchdowns, because he's that type of guy where he's not just a change of pace back. He's not just a speed back like Jordan Washington. He's got speed. Doesn't have the breakaway speed maybe that Jordan Washington does, but he absolutely has the speed, and he's got the size. He doesn't have the ice cream cone that Jonah Coleman has, but he's got the physical build. I mean, I mentioned the guns on the show a week or so ago when they were posing in the snow, and we're talking like literally like 2 or 3 like 18-ounce cans stacked on his shoulders. Like, it is insane to me. And so, yeah, like betting on Adam Mohammad is probably the safest bet you could have.
Oh, I couldn't agree with you more. So I would say that the number should be set somewhere around 70 in terms of over-under for carries, where I'm looking right now. Jonah Coleman last year had 193. DeMond Williams was second on the team with 83. Adam Mohammad had 42. And Kamren Davis also had 44 carries last year. So you take those out of the mix. It's going to be somewhere in that 70 to 80 carry range, which is going to be really interesting when I don't think Jonah Coleman is going to get the same amount of touches that he did, just in terms of just straight up attempts. We might see him throw the ball to him a little bit more. So that's something I'm really curious about in that regard when it comes to Adam Mohammad. But there are a whole bunch of other guys I want to get to. For me, the one right behind him is Paki Finau, where we've talked about him ad nauseum on this program throughout the offseason, rightfully so, because when Jedd Fisch spoke to us at his offseason media day during his press conference last week, one of the biggest things that he said was, we're not really looking to add any more offensive linemen right now. fans are going to feel however they will about that. But I think part of that is because of what Paki Finau brings to the table. And every time we mention how excited people around the program are about his potential, about what he brings to the table. And when we look at it, if Kieran Hatchett's able to practice for part of spring ball, that's going to be really important. Just have another veteran guy, whether it be a right guard or left guard, who can slide in there, but you still have a position to fill on the starting five this spring, whether it be Paki Finau, whether it be Zach Henning, whether it be anybody else. So I just look at everything he brings to the table from an athleticism standpoint, from a power standpoint, as he continues to add weight and strength to his frame. And I think this guy is going to be a really, really important piece of everything that this offense wants to do this season.
Absolutely. And I think it goes back to what Scott Huff said about him when he signed, when is Troy Fontano, Ezra Cleveland, like which one is he kind of, and it sounded, I remember if I can recall, I was trying to pull up the video really quick, but I think Huff said it was kind of a combination of the two. And what really intrigues me about that is we both are kind of torn where do you start him inside or is he truly a tackle? I think that's a problem. You don't care whether you saw it in 25 or 26 because Paki, like when he walked into the arena with the rest of the football team, like last month when they came in for that one game.
At the Purdue game, yeah.
You could just spot him from the other side of the court where it's like, oh, and by the way, we're talking walking with the rest of the offensive linemen. So it wasn't just like, hey, he's walking in front of, Luke Lucchini and Jordan Washington and kind of easy to stand out in that regard. No shot to either of those two guys. I'm just saying those are two shorter guys in comparison to Paki. But with that being said, it's like if he can physically grow into not in terms of stature, but just like add that necessary muscle, add everything in the weight room, I think it's absolutely going to translate to guard in this season. And then whether he becomes a tackle down the road, so be it, because they don't really need a tackle this season. But I do remember Jedd also noting before the Sun Bowl that he was getting some reps at tackle, that he had thrown him in the tackle mix. And like, well, again, if he ends up being good at tackle, so be it. But I think this season we both project him as a guard. But either way, like if Paki can truly become, let's say, what even like 3/4 of what Parker Roseford turned out to be in his first year, I would not be surprised.
No, I like we're going with that because he played in the Sun Bowl, played a lot, and he played really well. So that's something that really just helps add to the case there for why this coaching staff is excited about him, and honestly, rightfully so. There are a couple other guys. One name that we wanted to mention that certainly deserves to be in this conversation, but also might have just usurped it because he was a freshman All-American, is Decker DeGraaf. So just I wanted to make sure I said that name because shout out to Decker. He played very, very well this season. The guy for me that I'm really looking at, and I think could honestly end up as a starter if things go a certain way, is Rahshawn Clark. Where red shirts last season, worked with the corners, worked with the safeties a little bit. And this season, I wouldn't be surprised if we see him at nickel. And this is somebody who I've talked about Alex McLaughlin in the nickel. Dyson McCutcheon is a name that's going to be in the mix at the nickel position as well. But Rahshawn Clark, local 4-star guy from Garfield High School, you love all of that. But on top of that, he's just a really versatile guy who, as Giles Jackson told us last fall, could excel on both sides of the ball, where he works with the scout team offense at different points, lining up as a wide receiver. So having a guy who is just that talented and that versatile in the nickel with the traits that he's shown as a defensive back, where he was able to line up as an outside corner during fall camp, I really like where the roster is going in terms of what the secondary wants to do long-term. And I think he's a big part of that.
Yeah, and you have to remember he also was an original Arizona commit, so it's something that John Richardson knew, hey, this is the guy where I can see plenty of different things. What I remember about Rahshawn, he posted right around the Heisman ceremony before Travis. I think he was either before or right after Travis Hunter got it, where he either said like trendsetter or hey, this is what I want to become. And I think I'm not saying he turns out to be Travis Hunter. Don't get me wrong there. But I think the fact that he's got those high bars set, it's similar to what Jedd Fisch's mantra is for the entire program. We're going to aim big. We're going to do all these big things. And the fact that he's got that expectation for himself for, hey, I want to be that guy that can offer on both sides of the ball. I'm starting to get warmer on that thought of, he can have a lot of snaps. My thing is it's going to be, is he going to take more from Dyson? How does Alex McLaughlin? Because again, there's so many bodies at that position, not a ton, which is where he's going to be in the mix. But two veteran guys there, how much can he emerge as a shorter in stature guy? I'll be curious to see. But all the traits are there for it to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Lars, a couple of those guys we just mentioned, they were big-time recruits out of California. Washington needs to make sure it cleans up in California in 2026. which we'll get to right after a message from our good friends over at FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. Whether I'm backing my team for a late-game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three, I never feel like I missed my chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. So, Lars, I ran you through this in when we were doing our pre-show prep, and I'm going to ask you again because the number is still quite shocking. When you look at the top 20 recruits in the state of California in the 2025 class, how many did Washington pull in?
One. Dylan Robinson.
Yes. Great, which is a fantastic pull, by the way. Fantastic addition to this roster. There was one top 20 recruit in terms of 247's rankings from California on Washington's roster. There are 3 in the top 35. So, and they're all solid players. Don't get us wrong. Chris Lawson, Champ Talelea being the other 2 guys in that mix. But California has always been crucial to Washington's success on the recruiting trail. You and I went down a bit of a rabbit hole for another show that we're going to do where we kind of look back on the 2019 class, and you just started listing off, Jacob Bandis, Laiatu Latu, Trent McDuffie, Asa Turner, and all these high caliber 4-star guys that were contributors on this team for a variety of years, like truly 6-7 years when you think about Jacob Bandis and a couple of these guys, how long they stuck around. Kamren Fabiculanan being another one. That they all came from California. That is such a crucial part of what Washington has always been built on, where in-state guys are always very important, but dominating the West Coast, being big in Arizona, California, Oregon, Hawaii, that's vital to it. And there's so much talent coming out of the state of California that you need to find a way to capitalize that in 2026.
Yeah, I mean, even just look at the next class in 2020, they had 3, 4 in the top 22, and 5 in the top 25. So you're just looking at that and saying, again, now, to be fair, some of those guys did transfer out, but when I threw out the number to you, like, what's the number you should realistically expect on an average year? You said 5, and I agree. I said 7.5 is the over/under, and I would say 7 in a good year. Like, if you can get 7 top, call it 30. Just for a round number, let's call it 30. Because in that 20 class, you had Jalen McMillan at 5, Ethan Garbers at 7, Mark Redmond at 22, and now again, certain guys panned out. Certain guys didn't. Miles Morale was also in that mix as well. So yeah, there is a double-edged sword of, well, hey, don't just get a highly ranked kid from California just to get a highly ranked kid from California.
Absolutely.
But you also know this staff knows the premium targets, because I'm trying to pull up the 26 class or 25 class, 26 class right now. Because you look at it.
I've got some of the names if you need them. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's just like, there's plenty of guys on the board. So it's not like, for certain positions, yeah, D-line talent, not great on the West Coast. Let's just call it
right.
But with that, aside from the top end guys, which we've discussed on the show, you need to get at least one of them, whether it's Anthony Jones or Simote Katoanga. And so you look at some guys, if you can get maybe one of the top, 2 of the top 12, 1 or 2 of the top 12, and then 2 or 3 more in the top 25, that's cool, because then you can get 1 more in the top 30, and then you have 7. 7 in the top 30 is fine. That you can do it, because we are still seeing, because it's worth noting, is what I mentioned before the show, when Jedd Fisch is clearly going national. He's trying to get a couple of guys from Alabama, trying to get a couple of guys from Texas. And by the way, I applaud that, because I do think that's the right way to go. The base should still be from California, but there's certain positions and certain situations where go get a guy from New Jersey, because you look at the NFL, which we'll talk about in the next segment, plenty of talent in New Jersey that goes to the NFL, plenty of talent in the South that goes to the NFL. So you got to go where the talent's at.
So I agree with you, because you do need those pieces from Texas, those pieces from Alabama. We talked about Tyson Bacon coming up on an official visit yesterday. But those are supplementary to cornerstones. Recruiting in-state, when there's good talent in-state, is a cornerstone of what Washington has been built on. California is the biggest cornerstone to all of that. California has always been, because of the amount of talent coming out of the state. So let's run through this top 30 real fast. And there are a bunch of names that we've brought up on this show before that have Washington offers, have Washington interest for one reason or another. First one, tight end Mark Bowman. ranked number 5 in the state. I'm just going to run through names and ranks. Cornerback Devon Benjamin, number 7 is another one. Simote Katoanga, number 10, the defensive lineman. Deshaun Redu, somebody who's had a little bit of interest, number 14. Tommy Tofi at number 16 is another one. Brian Bonner, the running back, at 18. Brady Smigiel is ranked at 20 in terms of the composite right now. I believe he's number 12 or even a little bit higher on the 247 Sports rankings. Anthony Jones is at number 3 is another one. So there are some big names. I know Luke Weaver at 32, somebody the staff has had a little bit of interest in as well, the wide receiver. But you look through those names, and right now, if maybe 3, maybe 4, you could see legitimately ending up at Washington. And a lot of these guys coming in early on, whether it be, USC, Oregon, have made their mark on the West Coast. And USC getting back into the mix with some of these California kids is interesting. That's another topic for another day. But I say that to say Washington needs to make its mark, because Alabama came in and stole a bunch of guys from California last year. And, the Kalen DeBoer, Courtney Morgan relationships that they had at Washington for a long time. Again, different discussion for a different day. But Jedd Fisch and this coaching staff need to make sure they can make an impact with some of these high-end guys. And I think personally that starts with Brady Smigiel, because if you can grab an Anthony Jones, it's a really nice win. Simote Katoanga, we've talked about how big that would be for this program. One of those offensive linemen, Sam Utu, Tommy Tofi, where that would be really big, but it always starts with the quarterback. And it's why we keep emphasizing Brady Smigiel, because he, as that, game-changing quarterback in California, he really could be a foundational piece of this class.
Yeah, and quarterbacks always seem to be the cream of the crop, where you look at, the transfer class with Damon, where even, at Arizona, it's like Damon was one of the, if not the premium signee in that class. You look back, Ethan Garbage was the premium guy when the 2020 class came about. And look how many look how much, it's not a great example because Ethan didn't end up doing anything at Washington. Obviously, transferred to UCLA is what it is.
Yeah.
But you look at like Redmond, McMillan, all those guys, it's like, hey, well, Ethan committed pretty early on in the process, if I'm not mistaken. And that builds into everything. Brady obviously has high interest in Washington, but didn't make the immediate flip that we maybe thought he was in position to do. Can't really fault him for that. But if you can get Brady in the boat by, call it, May or June, which I don't necessarily know is on the board, because Brady could just wait till like July or August. But my point is, if you can get him in the boat, that changes the dynamic of the situation, because then you're looking at offensive linemen, receivers, and all those guys. You say, hey, why not stay on the West Coast? And if Ryder's going to USC, come up to Washington and make it USC Washington.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I actually want to dive into that. I think that's a great way to spend the last couple minutes as we talk about it, is what that impact of Brady Smigiel could look like. Because we mentioned the On 3 interview he did, where the first name out of his mouth was Ohio State, and he said, yeah, it's they're kind of off the table right now because I really like Chip Kelly, and now that he's going off to the Raiders, I've kind of taken them off the table for the time being. And then right after that it was Washington. So it's Washington, Auburn, South Carolina. We know UCLA, Michigan, they're in the mix as well. But I've kind of, like, if he goes to Michigan to sit behind Bryce Underwood for a couple of years, that's its own interesting situation. But I look at what he could be in Washington's offense with the ability he's shown as a runner, especially during his last season, combined with the arm talent, and what that could be like sitting behind Damon Williams for 1, maybe 2 years, where it's a little bit of a different situation than it is with Bryce Underwood, which is why I wanted to bring that up. But in terms of the recruiting, because that's something he said is important to him, is helping build a really good class around him. He's that kind of guy where it's not just players on offense. It's not just, for example, Brian Bonner would say, oh yeah, I know Brady Smigiel from, I've seen him on the circuit, I've played him, whatever it might be. And that's the guy I want to go play with. It's guys on defense. It's Devon Benjamin maybe saying, oh yeah, I've had to face that guy before. I know how good he is. Let me go team up with him in college. And that's something that Brady has emphasized is very important to him. And that's why we've seen Lars, because we've talked about Brady on this show for a while. And even when he was committed to Florida State, it was very clear that that was the kind of guy that Washington wanted in this class, and why getting him in the boat at some point is so important, because he really will help gravitate more elite players to come with him.
Yeah, and speaking of elite players, one guy that Washington obviously isn't in the mix for, hasn't been mentioned, but talking about premium talent that does have some Washington relationships is the modern day guys. When you mentioned Mark Bowman, but also Chris Henry Jr., like 5-star committed to Ohio State. we saw Washington take a couple of big swings last year. Like even after Dominic Olubade committed to Missouri, it's like, hey, maybe he's still in the boat. I would love it if they took one big swing. Now again, I'm not saying you're going to get him, but if you got the resources, you got his old quarterback, like you got the relationships there, at least players on the team. Why not make that effort? Why not try it? But I'm not saying not waste the resources, but it's like those are the relationships. Again, Chris Henry, dad played in the NFL, obviously tragic, unfortunate death, but NFL sell. Like, yes, obviously Ohio State, Brian Hartline has that sell, but Kevin Cummings and Jedd seem to be pretty clear making that case as well. So if you can find a way to maybe keep an elite guy like that on the West Coast, that would do some justice.
Right. And that's the interesting thing where I'm curious to see how they want to prioritize that in this class, where last year you talked about it being Andrew Marsh and Donovan Olubade, where that's a guy from Texas and a guy from Illinois who ended up at IMG. So it's, we're going to step out of our footprint to go try and find a player like that. And if they want to do that closer to home, that would just be a really, I don't mean curious and bad, but I just mean curious as in it's interesting to see how that might play out. But Lars, another interesting situation to monitor is how many Huskies might get drafted in April. So Lars, last time we didn't see any Huskies get drafted was 2023. I don't think we're going to see that this year. And obviously that was a very different situation where basically everybody came back. Michael Penix, Rome Odunze, Jalen McMillan, Jalen Polk, Braylon Trice, Troy Fautano, Roger Rosengarten. I'm not going to name every single other player that went off to the NFL, but that's worth mentioning that all those guys were selected within the top 100 in the next year. But we're not going to see that this year because I think that Carson Bruner is probably going to find his way onto a team on day 3. But the question is, will anybody else get drafted behind him?
I mean, there's a couple arguments to be made, and you'll talk about a couple guys. But the one that I want to talk about is Alphonzo Tuputala, his linebacker, Carson Bruner's linebacker teammate, where obviously Carson's got the prototypical size, 6'2", 6'3", 220, 225. Just kind of strikes you as a natural linebacker. Just has the look, obviously NFL pedigree, gene lines, all those sorts of things. But you can't look at Alphonzo's production in the last 2 years at Washington with 2 different defensive coordinators, especially what he did under Steve Belichick this past season, and say that guy doesn't deserve a shot in the NFL. Now, does he get drafted? Is he a day 3 pick? I could see him testing into a 6th, 7th round pick because he could make an impact on special teams and then work his way into a linebacker role. He just has that type of grit and determination to where he might not strike you as like, wow, you're taking like a 6'1" linebacker. Really? Like but you look at the versatility and then I guarantee you he can make an impact on special teams because he's a good teammate. He's never a guy that ruffled his feathers. And you talk about a guy that came in 2019, yes, that in that glorious 2019 class of all the 4-stars that we'll do on another show that I mentioned. And Alphonzo wasn't on that list, but there were certain guys that were 4-stars on that list that are probably not getting drafted. And so you look at it and say, if there's anybody that is a question mark, I would not be surprised if he ends up as a 6th, 7th rounder just because of all the testing and everything he can offer for a team.
Fun fact, I'm pretty sure that Alphonzo Tuputala was actually the lowest rated member of that class. And he turned out to have a really fantastic career. So shout out to him for all that. The guy who I really do believe should get drafted, if I could only pick one out of every other Husky in this draft, it would be Keleki Latu, where I look at his combination of size, of speed, and everything that he learned in just one season at Washington. I say in what has turned out to be a really solid tight end class, Tyler Warren, Harold Fann, Colston Loveland, a bunch of other guys at the top. It's going to eventually push some of these other names up the board when there is a run on tight ends, probably the middle of day 2, where we'll see a whole bunch of these players go within 10, 15 picks. Was I right about that?
You're one off.
Oh, was that one off? Did they flip him with Mickey Ayu?
No, actually, Mickey was higher. It was Tim Horn that was the lowest.
Oh, Tim. Oh, no, that doesn't count. The kickers are always in their own class.
But he is on scholarship. But he was on scholarship, so it was a legitimate scholarship day.
Fair enough. They just never get ranked. So, but to continue on with Keleki Latu there, the thing that really gets me is watching him improve as a blocker this year is what should set him apart. Because with his frame and everything you and I have talked about, with what he can do in the red zone, with what he can do just as a pass catcher, we talked about him. We talked to him in November, and he said, "I feel like I've really improved in terms of picking up yards after catch and finding ways to break tackles and do all sorts of stuff." That was all really great, but he improved just as much as a blocker, and that's what NFL teams want to see. Because if you can have a guy like that who can, stay in and block half the time, but can still go out and make plays and just pick up 8, 9, 10 yards 2, 3, 4 times a game, you're going to have a solid career at the NFL level at the position as a tight end too.
And it would also be a testament to Jordan Papa's ability to develop guys, because when you look at what he did at Cal and Nevada, it was okay. Like the potential is there, size and measurables are all there, but how many guys in the every draft you can look at a guy like, hey, he's 6'4", 210, 220. He can be a great tight end. Or he can do all this. Like he's got the size and the measurables, the underwear in gymnastics or underwear in Olympics. That's what it is. Known as the NFL Combine. And it's like, almost similar like to Devin Culp. It's like, hey, if you can test athletically and earn a spot, but Keleki really does have that kind of all-around natural, almost in a way like Drew Sample, where it's like he's not going to wow you. He's obviously not, Gronk or I said a different name I don't want to mention there. Travis Kelce, which is guys where you can just immediately look at that. George Kittle, like the obvious, the big names. It's like he's not going to wow you, but most tight ends, like aside from those guys, are the Drew Samples. Hey, we need you to be a third blocker. We need you to just kind of be a red zone target. Maybe have 1, 2, 3 maybe targets a game where you can have a 6-7 year career. And as long as Keleki can stay healthy, which was the important thing this year, the fact that he proved like, hey, I can actually do it for a whole year. Now it's a matter of, okay, can you translate that to the NFL?
So I actually wanted to point at I'm glad you mentioned Drew Sample. I was just going to point at a different Jordan Pow product who was the tight end 2 here in Seattle for a long time. And then Will Dissly, where Will Dissly is, I think, the perfect example of this, because he's carved out a really nice career as just I don't want to say an afterthought, because I feel like that's a shot when it's not meant to be that way at all, but as somewhat of an afterthought in the passing game sometimes. And then we see him go down to LA this season and put up career highs in catches, in yards. And it's one of those things where he's just found a really nice fit for himself, and Keleki can do the exact same thing.
Fun fact, who's now going to be his tight end coach?
Oh, it's Scott Huff. Yeah. Oh, no, Scott Huff's with the Rams. No, Scott Huff's with the Rams.
Oh, that is with the Chargers.
No.
That's right. Okay, same city, close enough. But no, man, that would have been so poetic. But no, you're absolutely right. I not that I forgot about Will, but he was kind of, Will and Drew are very similar in that mold. But another guy that kind of is intriguing in that similar, was a former 4-star, has the size and measurables, all those sorts of things. But this isn't getting, talked about as a guarantee, like, hey, this guy could be a 3rd, 4th, 5th rounder, more so probably 6th, 7th, is Kamren Fabiculanan. 6'1", 210, 190, somewhere in that range, call it. But he's a guy where I think he grew a lot as a leader. And you look in the 23 season, where if not for Cam Fab, I don't know if the Pac-12 championship, again, they probably still win it, but his emergence and his return in that game really set the tone from a physicality standpoint. And the fact that, again, another guy where, hey, if you need him to go on special teams, he can do that. Like that used to be one of the staples of the program until Jedd Fisch decided to play a bunch of freshmen and backups last year on special teams, which is what it is. But you look at a guy like him, where it's former 4-star, out of Oaks Christian, again, another top California prospect, ironically, to pull this whole show together here.
Yeah,
but California, like it's California West. That's what I'm saying. Where it's, again, you have all these highly prominent guys where you can sell development only if you actually get them to the NFL. If Cam, if some of these guys don't end up making it, it's like, well, dang, now the sell is not as easy. So if Cam would be a guy that I would also throw in the mix as well.
So I certainly agree with you. I wouldn't be surprised if he did get drafted late on day 3 because of the senior leadership, the veteran experience, all those things that you mentioned. But I think what he's going to bring the most value of is one of the last things you said there was special teams. Is he's somebody who's going to be a great special teams player if he gets that opportunity, because he can stick around for a while just as a gunner, as somebody who can, like, I'm never going to compare anybody to Matthew Slater just as a Patriots fan, because that's a once-in-a-lifetime special teamer, but just somebody who can make a living as a special teamer, where you can find your way onto the roster and play as a backup safety and still, be on kick coverage, be on punt coverage, do those different sorts of things. And just with the way that he learned how to attack angles, because we saw that really improve throughout his time at Washington, especially this past season. He really could show that he can be a fantastic player in that realm.
And you think about 2 guys who went deep with their teams in the rookie season in the NFL that were late picks, Eddie and Dom Hampton.
Yep.
Both guys were both defenders where it's like, hey, like they're never. I mean, Eddie might wow you a little bit more so, but Dom. The reason why I think it was more so Dom was you look at it's like again the physical nature where you can be a day 3 pick and find a way to make an impact on special teams, and then earn your stripes. Whereas some guys get drafted in the first round, they end up flaming out because those day 3 picks end up beating them out. And you look, same thing, with guys that go undrafted, where same kind of principle where you're motivated. Caleb Wilson. Mr. Irrelevant, it didn't end up having a long career, but again, like all those guys, you can end up earning your spots no matter where you are. And so just because you're a day 3, 6, 7 round pick doesn't mean you still can't end up having a productive career. And I'm obviously leaving out a different Mr. Irrelevant as who was a quarterback in San Francisco because that does not help the cause here. But
that doesn't count.
Exactly. That's an anomaly. But there's plenty of guys every year where it's like, oh, hey, this 7th rounders end up earning his spot. And yeah, mostly because of special teams. Now, depending on where he ends up getting drafted, maybe he emerges as a safety. But there's a lot of guys where, and I think that's the benefit of having an NFL-style coach and an NFL-style program, is Jedd's going to preach, I would imagine so, especially with now hiring a special teams coordinator, the importance of special teams. Get back to the basics of, hey, you know what? You want to earn a shot in the NFL? If you're not a quarterback, earn it on special teams. If you happen to be good at your position, that's just a bonus. That means you go higher. But the only way you're doing it is by earning it on special teams.
So, Lars, I'm going to end this with a bold prediction. We're only going to see 1, maybe 2 or 3 Huskies drafted this year in 2025. Next year, in 2026, I'm setting the over-under at 5.5, and I'm taking the over. I'm just going to leave that there for right now. We're going to dive into that way more down the line because we're going to dive into so many other things down the line as well. As always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you everydayers tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the offseason. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel new content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you never miss when we post a new video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, jump right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please give us a 5-star review as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Friday.